Good evening, everybody. I think we can begin. Probably still have some stragglers coming in, but let's start off. I'm Reinmar Zeidler. I'm a member of the steering committee of the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. And I'm welcoming you to our penultimate webinar event before everyone disperses for the summer. And we're focused today on current proposals and the debate about expanding nuclear energy in New Hampshire and in New England. And we're extremely pleased and grateful to have three outstanding speakers with us this afternoon who come to the question of what role nuclear power can or should play in New Hampshire from very different perspectives. So I'm going to briefly set a context for this discussion, and then I'll introduce our speakers. Please put your questions and comments into the chat at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So, as many of you know, on March 26th of this year, Governor Ayotte signed an executive order directing the Department of Energy to investigate the viability of nuclear energy as a component of New Hampshire's future energy mix. This directive is grounded first and foremost on the question of energy affordability. It mentions recent studies showing that investments in nuclear would lead to lower costs for consumers than increases in solar and wind generation. I don't know what those studies are. I'm curious. I wish she had cited them. It further states that New England's regional energy policies in the past have emphasized greenhouse gas reductions instead of looking for the most cost-effective generation to reduce costs to taxpayers, to ratepayers. And it further states that Generation 3 plus nuclear technologies have already been deployed and that advanced Generation 4 technologies are being developed rapidly and will soon be deployed. The directive then lists 6 questions about nuclear energy deployment that the Department of Energy should investigate. These are focused in particular on the various strategies to attract nuclear development to New Hampshire. And the directive ends by asking the DOE, Department of Energy, to prepare a preliminary nuclear roadmap in 6 months. So by the end of September of this year, I guess. And a final report in 24 months. So one step being taken by the Department of Energy in response to this order is to bring various stakeholders together this very week, June 23rd, tomorrow, through 25th in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to discuss how and whether our state can attract, develop, and deploy nuclear energy. These sessions are open to the public, and we, that is the New Hampshire Network, encourage folks to attend if you possibly can. The first 2 days will consist of presentations, and the third day will provide opportunities for public feedback. That's Thursday. So that's kind of the context in which we decided to do this webinar and to do it in advance of those meetings. And now I would like to introduce our guest speakers for this afternoon. I'll introduce all three now, and then each of them will talk. Hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So first up, we are lucky to have Dr. Edwin Lyman, who's Director of Nuclear Power Safety with the Union of Concerned Scientists. Dr. Lyman is an internationally recognized expert on nuclear power safety and security. He is a member of the Institute of Nuclear Materials Management, the American Nuclear Society, and he's past president of the Nuclear Control Institute. He's testified numerous times before Congress and before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and he served as an expert analyst on damage to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant after the earthquake and tsunami of 2011. So he comes to us with a profound knowledge of today's nuclear industries at the international scale. Welcome, Dr. Lyman. And then following Dr. Lyman, we have Representative Kat McGhee, who needs very little introduction to this audience, I suspect, but is a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives representing Hillsborough District 35. Representative McGhee is a member of the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee since 2019, long time, and one of the most active members of the House, having sponsored something like, I think, 17 or 18 bills in the 2026 legislative season, most of them relating to energy systems policy. So she probably has as comprehensive a view as anyone of the complex, changing, variable New Hampshire energy policy landscape. So welcome to Representative McGhee. And then finally, we have Doug Boden, who is Executive Director of the Seacoast Anti-Pollution League based in Barrington, New Hampshire, and Program Manager for the Seacoast Area Renewable Energy Initiative in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and was earlier New Hampshire Program Director for Clean Water Action, so has devoted many years to protecting and developing the New Hampshire seacoast with a focus on energy systems. So welcome, Doug Boden. And I should say, just in conclusion, that I did try to find a speaker more closely connected with the governor's office or with the Department of Energy, was unable to do so. I think they're probably very busy with this week's conference. So with that, Dr. Lyman, the stage is yours. And I think you should be able to share your slides.
Not yet.
Oh, okay, hang on. I'll make you co-host. There you go.
Okay. How's it looking?
Great. It's
Okay.
coming up. It's not in the slideshow mode, but that's okay. Yeah, great. Perfect.
Right. How's the sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm going to keep my video off because of bandwidth issues. And I should say we're having a thunderstorm at the moment.
Oh,
So I hope if anything happens, that's probably the reason. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Thanks for the introduction. Um, I don't have much time and I have too many slides, so I'm just going to get right into it. Anyway, the Union of Concerned Scientists was founded more than 50 years ago at MIT, and one of the first issues it ever worked on was nuclear power safety. And since then, that has been an issue that, even though the organization has expanded and taken on a lot of other of the environmental and public policy challenges that we're facing today, it's still maintained an interest in nuclear power and ensuring safety. And that entire time, we've never taken a position either pro or anti-nuclear power. But we do strongly believe that it has significant risks, and those have to be taken seriously if the technology is to play an expanded role in our energy future. And a key component of that is strong regulation, both of safety and security of nuclear power. Without a strong and effective regulator, you can't have safe nuclear power. And unfortunately, today, if I have time, I'll describe how at the federal level, which is uh, the authority for licensing commercial nuclear power plants in this country, it's facing unprecedented challenges to its independence. And therefore, we have serious concerns about the effectiveness and the independence of the nuclear regulator, which causes us to be less confident that the regulator is going to maintain nuclear safety as its priority. So I don't really have to go through the litany of legacy issues that nuclear power has brought, from safety. The most recent example of that was the triple reactor meltdown, Fukushima, Japan, 2011. Security is also an ever-present issue, and today the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine is at the center of a war zone and has been so since 2022, facing unprecedented challenges to its integrity and risking the potential for a nuclear accident that could cause even further devastation to the region. Nuclear proliferation is an unavoidable consequence of nuclear power if you don't have stringent controls over it. Nuclear power is a dual-use technology. The same facilities that can produce uh, uh, power for peaceful uses can also be misused to produce materials for nuclear weapons. And the Iran crisis is the current poster child for what happens when there's not effective control over nuclear fuel cycle facilities. The waste issue is still out there, even though the nuclear industry promised more than 70 years ago that it's a political problem, not a technical problem, to dispose of the long-lived radioactive waste from nuclear power plants. That political problem has turned out to be unsolvable at the moment, and so there's currently no federal program for meeting the U.S. government's obligations to take title to spent nuclear fuel and take it off the hands of the utilities that have generated. So there's no prospect in sight for moving nuclear waste away from nuclear power plants like Seabrook to a federal repository. And finally, the overarching issue with nuclear power is it's simply too expensive, especially new nuclear power plants are extremely costly to build and to operate. Nevertheless, nuclear power is being put forward as a potential alternative for meeting the projected demand, at least some projected demand for data center expansion. And there are a variety of different ways in which that can be addressed, either through purchasing power from existing nuclear plants dedicated for data centers to actually building co-located new reactors at data center locations. And that raises some problematic, or perhaps the most problematic way in which nuclear power could be used to power data centers. Now, the public debate about nuclear power is not very balanced at the moment. In fact, the pro-nuclear voices are dominating the debate, and as a result, there's a lot of misinformation that's being spread around. And I have to say, so the enthusiasm that you hear from at the federal level and in many states, including this remark from Governor Ayotte, if I'm pronouncing that right, who claims that the motivation for this study is ultimately bringing next generation nuclear power to help bring down costs for families. President Trump has declared that nuclear power is very safe and environmental. Some other governors are more cautious, like Governor Spanberger in Virginia. But ultimately, as we'll see, cost is still the major obstacle for nuclear power development. The current fleet is based on the Large Light Water Reactor, again, like the Seabrook station. These reactors are typically about 1,000 megawatts of electrical power, and they use ordinary water as their coolant. And they also use fuel, which is enriched uranium, and that is the fuel that is mined from the ground is a mixture of primarily two different uranium isotopes. One of them is at too low a concentration to support a fission chain reaction in a nuclear reactor without increasing its concentration. So mined uranium has to be enriched to be able to use it in nuclear and light water reactors. But that enrichment is typically no more than about 5%. And at that level, that fuel is not directly usable in nuclear weapons. So the current fuel cycle supporting the Large Light Water Reactor has some proliferation resistance in that if that fuel is diverted or stolen, it has to be further enriched to be usable in nuclear weapons. And enrichment technology is still, again, highly controlled and available to very few countries and probably not to terrorists. But so outside of China, very few of these reactors have been built in recent decades, and the main reason is that they've proven to be too expensive and they take too long to build. And electricity, the cost of electricity produced by these very expensive reactors is not competitive compared to renewables in many markets at this time. Now, the nuclear industry actually tried to make nuclear power quicker and cheaper with designs like the AP1000. This is an evolutionary variant, what some might refer to as this Gen 3 plus reactor, that was explicitly designed to try to to reduce the capital cost of nuclear power plants and to make them to enable them to be built more quickly. And the way that the AP1000 went about that was to reduce the number of safety systems that the plant has to operate with, among other modifications. And the point was to try to make it, again, competitive with other sources of electricity. And back in the early 2000s, they thought they could do that. But the first example of building the AP1000 in the United States, the famous story of Project Vogel in Georgia, was they ended up more than twice, well over twice the original projected capital cost. And they took more than twice or almost three times to reach operation as was originally projected. And these cost overruns and delays are now, there's a lot of hand-wringing about what was responsible, but ultimately the Southern Company or Georgia Power, which was responsible for the Vogel project, cited having an incomplete design as one of the major factors for the problems with with project execution. And that's namely they started building before the design was complete. And as a result, they had to learn as they go, as they went. And often that led to the need for modifications, rework, and other complications that greatly cause delays. So the main lesson is you don't rush into projects like that, especially with an incomplete design. Ultimately, Vogel has turned out to be the projected electricity cost is well over what fossil fuels and many renewables can produce today. And who's paying for those additional costs? Well, the ratepayers are paying. They started paying for Vogel before it ever operated, and they're going to be continuing to pay a premium for decades, which has become a political problem in Georgia. Taxpayers will also have to foot the bill for new reactors. In fact, because even if the cost of the next AP1000s is lower due to lessons being learned, it's still not going to be competitive with many other sources of electricity and will require subsidies from the federal government at a minimum to be competitive. And those are available. There's an investment and a production tax credit available for new nuclear power plants that begin operation before, I think it's 2034. I'll have to double check that, but there are these credits available. But even so, even with those tax credits, it's probably not going to be affordable, at least the next several models. So we're faced with the possibility that other entities are going to have to foot the bill for these subsidies, either the states or even like tech companies themselves. And there's a lot of hope among the nuclear industry that that tech companies who are spending so lavishly on AI and data centers would be willing to pay above market prices for nuclear power. That they've shown willingness to do that, at least for gas plants. But the question is that sustainable? Now, some people have, or advocates for small modular reactors, claim that they can solve the problems of large nuclear power plants. And small modular reactors are generally defined as being 300 megawatts or less. That's about a third of the size of current reactors. And the key to um, improving their economics is the idea that they can be mass constructed. So if you have a lot of orders, you can build them in a centralized factory and learn how to make them cheaper and do them better, and that would reduce their cost. And there are a whole lot of other claims that are made about small modular reactors of various designs, most of which are misleading or false, but they're repeated prominently in the current debate. So there's a wide variety of new reactor designs that are being pursued at various levels. Uh, and they go from small modular light water reactors, that is, designs that are based on light water reactor technology, but are shrunk down and have other modifications to try to make them smaller and factory assembled. And one leader of the pack is the GE Hitachi BWRX 300, which is pursuing a construction permit at Clinch River, Tennessee, by the Tennessee Valley Authority, but has also received a construction permit from Ontario Power Generation to build at least or up to four in Ontario. So that's really they're further ahead than many other designs in terms of potential commercial viability. Then there's a whole range of more exotic types of reactors. Generally speaking, they're referred to as advanced reactors, and that means typically they use different types of coolants than ordinary water. So, for instance, Bill Gates founded a company called TerraPower probably 20 years ago that is developing a sodium-cooled fast reactor. And the main thing to understand here is that the coolant, as the name would suggest, is not ordinary water, but actually liquid sodium. And this is a very old type of reactor design. In fact, that maybe predates the light water reactor that people have tried around the world or in various countries, including the United States, with limited success. Nevertheless, there are still some true believers in this technology who managed to get to Bill Gates and convince him it was worth investing something like $1 billion of his money in this project. Then there are high temperature gas cooled reactors. This is another candidate for new reactors in this country. These are reactors that use high pressure helium gas as the coolant, and they operate at much higher temperatures than light water reactors. There's currently a proposal to build four of these reactors in Seadrift, Texas, adjacent to a Dow chemical plant to provide electricity and heat for these reactors. Then even more imaginative types of reactors are those that use molten salts to cool them. That would be chemical analogs of table salt, except heated high enough so they become liquid. Then you're talking about many hundreds of degrees hotter than light water reactors, for example, to enable that to happen. And some of those involve solid fuels, so you have a molten salt coolant and a solid fuel, but some of them, the fuel itself is a liquid dissolved in the molten salt. And there's extremely limited operational experience with that type of reactor, and they raise all sorts of issues, which I can talk about. And as a separate class, but not really separate technology, are microreactors, and they have been defined as really tiny reactors, maybe less than 20 megawatts electric, or even smaller. And these are envisioned as kind of bespoke power sources for unique applications where the competitor is a very expensive import of fossil fuel, for example. So it's acknowledged that these by themselves are not going to be competitive. They're not going to be useful for grid power generation. At least most people understand that. And again, there's a whole menagerie of these different reactor types. Now I'm running out of time. So, bottom line is these are not affordable. Uh, First of all, the uh, small modular light water reactors, which are probably the closest to current reactor technologies and therefore have probably the shortest pathway to actual commercialization, are not affordable, mainly because of economies of scale. And a smaller reactor is not going to produce less expensive electricity than a larger reactor unless you make a whole lot of other compromises in its design and operation, because otherwise you're just shrinking down a reactor and you're going against economies of scale. Uh, Now, again, SMR advocates claim that diseconomies of scale can be counteracted by having a large order book and being able to manufacture many hundreds of units a year until you learn how to do them better. But that, again, hasn't been proven. In fact, there's no evidence that even if you can successfully reduce costs that way, that it would counter this economies of scale penalty. Uh, and I have a lot of data, which I'll share with you about how expensive these first of a kind reactors are, even more expensive than light water, small modular light water reactors, or these different types of advanced reactors where they have different designs, different coolants, they need different materials. There are a lot of uh, uh, the supply chains are not even in place for many of these designs. And so they don't even have a good source for the materials and fuels to support these reactors. And yeah, we've got way too much. Our concerns are primarily with safety and security. The claims that small reactors are safer are, again, not generally true. It really depends on a whole lot of factors other than the intrinsic design. But just to go through a few myths, uh, these reactors cannot safely shut themselves down forever without any operators in the room. Uh, they are not necessarily passively safe. They can be unstable or as unstable as Chernobyl, like the TerraPower reactor being built by Bill Gates. The high temperature gas cooled reactors, which use a special kind of fuel called TRISO, which has been characterized as the meltdown proof. It's not. And I can go into more detail about these. And of course, ultimately, you always have to worry about sabotage. No matter how safe a nuclear reactor looks on paper, uh, if there's a saboteur out there who knows a little bit about how it works, they can figure out a way to break it. In fact, the US government itself spent some time breaking reactors back in the bad old days when such things were acceptable. And here's an example of a test reactor that's being developed for the space reactor program, which was blown apart just by pulling out its control or by essentially inducing what's called a reactivity excursion. That is taking out taking your foot off the gas, or no, taking your foot off the brake that is controlling the nuclear chain reaction. In fact, if you do that quickly enough, you can actually cause an explosion. So, just getting to the summary here. Um, there's a lot of competition among all the vendors of these peddling these different reactor types. They're all trying to get limited public and private resources, and as a result, they're making more and more extreme claims to try to get attention. And that is, I think, driving the whole policy debate in a bad direction because, again, it's setting up the whole industry for failure. At the same time, the independence of the federal regulator has been compromised by administration initiatives similar to those at other independent agencies, but are uniquely being applied to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, through executive orders the Trump administration issued to um, essentially force them to rewrite all their regulations to accelerate licensing nuclear power plants. And just going back to the Vogtle experience, speeding up licensing and construction of nuclear power plants is not necessarily going to benefit you in the end. If you don't have a complete design, you're going to end up possibly making the same mistakes or worse. So my last message is that states that are embracing nuclear power, that are looking for ways uh, to attract new nuclear power projects through making through financial incentives and other means, that they should think twice about what they're asking for, given the lack of adequate regulation on the federal level, which again I can go into in a lot more detail if you want. It's puzzling why a state like New Hampshire would be interested in spending public money, and this is what we're really talking about: massive subsidies. The ratepayers can't shoulder this whole cost penalty. So ultimately, it's going to have to fall on the taxpayer if uh, if these states really want to attract these super expensive non or uneconomic projects. And so, why are you spending public money to attract nuclear projects that you don't have the authority to actually block if they turn out to if the state itself and the public within the state believe that they're not safe, because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the final arbiter over safety and security of nuclear power, and the states have very limited authority to block nuclear projects and no authority if it has to do with their safety. So again, a word of caution here. And I'm sorry if I've spoken too long. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lyman. That's great. A great introduction to the current landscape. And you at the very end, you kind of touched on an anomaly, which I must say I don't understand at all, which is that not only New Hampshire, but also the five other New England states have all come out in favor of at least pursuing um, uh, nuclear energy. And maybe they're thinking about just sort of more research, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like everybody wants to get onto the this particular bandwagon. So next we have Representative McGhee. What would you like to say, Representative McGhee, about legislation, current and recent, relating to this issue in New Hampshire?
Well, I have a few slides, but I wanted to thank Edwin Lyman for a wonderful intro. I think that was really helpful to look at where we're at in the technology because there's so many terms that are bandied about that people don't understand. So that was really great. And I also want to say on your point about why the states might be looking at this, why the governors have discussed it. I was at the New England Canada Business Council meeting on energy at the Seaport Hotel in December, and we were talking about the dilemma of increasing demand, which we're seeing anew. New Hampshire had been steady for a while, and we're starting to increase. And the rest of New England is that way too, because beneficial electrification means you need more electric, power. And so this region, our regional grid, had 9 nuclear power plants to start with, and we have allowed many of them to go offline. And so we're now down to 2 out of 9. So I think some of the states are starting to rethink that that was non-emitting energy, that was steady state, and so they're resurfacing talks, understanding that you need a mix of energy in order to solve the problem. So I think that's where it comes from. And also, since it is so expensive to build infrastructure, and what you basically need is a way to get it from where it's being produced to an interconnection and onto the transmission grid in order for it to be useful. Those facilities are already interconnected, right? So they lower some of the inherent costs that would be coming along with these plants. But that's just an aside. I just thought I'd throw that in since I have it in my head. So am I putting up my slides or do you guys do that?
You can go ahead and do that. I've
Okay.
made you co-host, so yeah.
Okay, so I will share. Bear with me one second, folks. Oh, I have a couple of versions open. Which one's the right one? All right, well, we'll go with this one. So I I put a top slide on here. Is nuclear power right for New Hampshire? And the answer is it depends. So I started also, as Reinmar did at the top, with a portion of the executive order that the governor put out, instructing the Department of Energy to move forward with looking into, as it says here, the order is directing action to facilitate the integration of advanced nuclear electric generation into New Hampshire's generation mix. And the issue that I have with that statement and the way that it's put forth and the piece that I want to provide in terms of context is that New Hampshire doesn't really have a generation mix because we don't own the generation. And so our taking ratepayer money and taxpayer money in order to create these very expensive new facilities, while it might be great from an innovation perspective, we're a low population state. And all of the energy that is generated in our state is going onto the grid because our electric grid is regional. And so, I think people don't even realize that Seabrook is a power plant that we all paid for. We had stranded costs for many years to pay for that plant. But right now, their power purchase agreement, the only one that they have is with Massachusetts. So we don't use the nuclear power plant that's located in our state today. So that even begs a further question of why do we need more nuclear? We don't even use what we already paid for. And I thought some of that context would be valuable here. So the other stuff I have underlined is obviously the claim that New Hampshire energy policy focuses on affordability by removing barriers to innovation and enabling cost-effective energy sources. We have not had a good history of doing that of late. And so we are saying it, but saying isn't doing, as we all know. And then the next statement also you brought up, Reinmar, in the introduction. I would like to see those studies because I would be surprised if they weren't supported by, fossil fuel. I would like to know who's behind the studies because as we'll talk about a little later on in my slides, we have a queue for our regional grid of projects that are being proposed in order to solve our energy demand in the future. So we have a queue of folks who want to run power plants coming on. And there are no gas or nuclear projects in that queue. So there's a question of why the market is selecting that way, and I think we should think about that. So my button is not working, so I'm not sure why.
So it's not advancing. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not.
it wasn't actually in slideshow
I know.
mode. I think maybe that
I
was it.
can't figure out why. Let me see. Slideshow. Um,
Now I think you're not sharing. You can start sharing again.
I'm
Maybe
not.
it'll
Yeah, I'm gonna do
yeah.
slide only, I think. I hope. Slide. Okay. I have notes here, but I'm not gonna use them because I already know what I'm saying. So
Hmm.
go back to Zoom and we'll share. Sorry, folks, for the slight delay.
Okay.
Let's see if we can. Mm, yeah, that's a different. Okay. And I will. Yeah, so this one's moving. Okay. So what do you see now? Are you seeing notes on the bottom? Because
No,
no,
nope.
okay.
Not now.
Okay. So actually my walking buddy Marilyn, I think she's on the call. I was talking to her about this today and she said, make a slide that shows um, how the system works. And this will explain a little further what I was saying earlier. So if you start at the bottom of the circle, the generators are,
Kat, you're not on that slide yet, though. You're right on the title slide right now.
oh, geez. Well, I am in my, so I don't know how do I fix
Oh,
that? Well,
really?
yep. So I'm not sure why. Can anyone?
Oh,
I don't know how to get it to advance. It's advanced for me. I moved ahead, so I thought you were
yeah.
seeing
Yeah,
it. I'll
that's
stop
weird.
sharing and share again. It's belabored, but I'll do it because I don't know
Yeah.
what else you do. Okay, let's try that. There you go. How's that?
That looks good.
Okay,
That's the one that you were talking about.
Marilyn, that's your slide. Okay, so how would advanced nuclear work for New Hampshire? Um, so the governor's executive order says to lower costs and bring more in-state generation to meet demand. So that the impetus for that is that we have been using energy efficiency for many years to lower our emissions in the generation sector and energy efficiency to lower our demand. And so we knew that that was going to level off, and it did. And it leveled off really during COVID. So we're only just starting to see a rise in demand now. And the projections are that those increases will continue. But whether the generation is in state or not, we are receiving our energy today via the transmission grid. So the generators are privately owned and the state does not own them. So having more in-state generation doesn't mean we have anything because the owners of those plants are still able to sell their power to whomever they would like. If we ended up paying for that little star on the end there under the generators is a nuclear plant, if we decided to go with a new nuclear power plant, we would both have to find a way to foot that bill. And I think Edwin had a great discussion around how that funding could happen. But we are a small population state, which means the amount of money that each of us would be paying for this nuclear power plant would be pretty significant. It would be probably more than we had paid for Seabrook, which was, 4 times the energy at 1280 megawatts. So anyway, so we would have to pay for the plant and then we would have to purchase the energy in order for it not to go on the grid and just be part of the mix that everybody is sharing in. So that isn't really how it works. And so from the generators, you go to the ISO New England. That's the Independent System Operators of New England. They are a nonprofit group. They are federally regulated, and their job is to do oversight of the energy itself to provide reliability. So their number one job is reliability of electricity. And then they also do all kinds of forecasting and work with states around energy coming on and off that grid just to make sure that it's going to work and work for the future and that we're not going to run out. So their job is reliability. We're not responsible for reliability because we're part of a grid. So then the ISO New England is in charge of the transmission system, and that transmission system then feeds the utilities. And we have public utilities, and now we also have independent competitors in the energy field who are also selling energy to businesses and residents, like CPCNH, Community Power Coalition. So the utilities, the piece that they play is they're responsible for the poles and wires since deregulation. They no longer are owners in generation per se, although we do have a bill coming up that I'll explain that passed this year that has, is allowing them back into a bit of generation ownership. But basically, the utilities are responsible for distributing the energy that comes from the transmission grid to people's homes and businesses. So that's how the system works, which means if we add another power plant in New Hampshire and say it's our New Hampshire plant, it's like that isn't how it works. States don't own the means of production here. We're not communist, right? It's a free market. So that's the thing you have to understand is that I think the premise of the executive order and the premise of the way the Republicans in my caucus in the House of Representatives are approaching trying to find a solution to a problem that has not yet really been fully defined, which is a thing that bothers me as a project program manager. You know, we haven't had an energy plan for, 8 to 10 years. And with no plan in place, I'm questioning what we're solving for, right? To throw a whole bunch of money at something and say, well, could it be solved by increased energy efficiency dollars, or getting people off oil for their home heating and doing more ground source heat pumps? Like, we could be leveraging a lot of modern approaches to making our state less dependent on external fuels. And we could rely on the grid and believe that the people that are running it are actually going to continue running it in a reliable way. But that's just me. So do I have to, I'm trying to change the slide again. I'm going to reshare. I advanced it, and I'll just share again, and hopefully this will work. All right. Can you see that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So what is New Hampshire saying and doing to advance nuclear power? As you mentioned at the top, and I think we'll talk about it at the end, the Department of Energy is running a nuclear conference at the Department of Environmental Services at Pease Air Force Base, and they also are allowing people to join through Zoom. The conference is starting tomorrow on the 23rd through the 25th. The full day on the 25th is going to be dedicated to taking input from people, concerns, input, technical updates, questions, I guess. So that'll be good. And they've assembled folks from the federal government and the ISO New England, NextEra Energy, who runs Seabrook, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Department of Energy is coming on Wednesday. So it's a fulsome looking set of topics. And I guess what they're doing is they're proceeding with the launch of the executive order. So what's happened just recently in the state, again, to give more context, is that the utilities are now allowed to own or invest in up to 10% of their customer supply load from nuclear, hydrogen, gas, or renewables, and recover their investment from all of us. So HB 1775, and the prime sponsor of that bill is on this Zoom this evening, was passed into law to add nuclear, hydrogen, and gas to the statute, which governs utility investment in distributed energy resources. So we had a statute that was designed to say distributed, local energy resources are in a separate category, and we would like our utilities to help jumpstart investment in those in order, basically the idea was to increase our portfolio diversity, which would help bring competition, which would lower costs, right? So that had a reason and a rationale, and it was researched, and they were doing it for a purpose. So that was the original intent. And now we've added these other energy sources because they're desired. Without really so we're putting the risk and we're putting the cost on the ratepayer, because the public utilities are allowed to recover whatever costs they spend. So at this point, we don't know what the expenses are going to be, but we know that that actually the third bullet says it, that the rate recovery is allowed through the Public Utilities Commission, but they have to follow statutory language, and the language of this bill basically says that allowing the utilities to own or operate nuclear or gas generation is in the best interest of utility customers. So we're already, telling what the outcome is, so that you will be paying for it. And I'm not sure if there's anything else I want to say about that. So this is my last slide, and basically the main points that I would want considered in this effort is, if it's going to lower costs, make that case, because as Mr. Lyman made very clear, the costs can be all over the place. What you get for the cost can be all over the place. The small modular reactor, which is such a fascination for everyone, and he mentioned this as well, I was going to mention it as well, the smaller the energy that's coming out, the 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 higher the cost is per megawatt, right? You're not getting a higher value, and the cost benefit analysis doesn't work out as well. So it's kind of a risky thing to be moving towards micro reactors. It's not like you're going to have one in your backyard. It doesn't work that way. So the idea that these are going to be easily deployable and we'll have multiples, no, it's still a very expensive endeavor, and it's still a very complex endeavor. And many of the reactor designs are unprecedented at this point. They're not out there. They're not being used. So I don't see I always saw New Hampshire not as a early adopter, not as a fast follower. Like we are people who are cautious about what we spend our money on. So this is very out of character, I think, to go this way. But anyway, so don't give us the answers before examining the questions. I understand that the DOE is being asked to come up with concepts of a plan, but there's not any subject matter expertise. And people always get mad at me when I say that, but I live with a PhD from Los Alamos who is a nuclear engineer. So I am aware that we do not have subject matter expertise in our Department of Energy for this particular field. And so I have a question on whether they are going to be able to ask the right questions to properly vet any new technologies, or it's just going to be, we like this guy best. So, and that is not a good way to make a decision on a nuclear reactor. What specific problem of New Hampshire's will the reactor solve? Because if you bring in 300 megawatts and it goes on to the grid, everyone in New England will thank us for paying for it. And maybe there'll be some way that they'll also be involved in helping pay for it. I don't know. But if we're not working with others, there's no reason for it to be located in New Hampshire specifically, because we don't own it. We're not going to own it. And so that's one of my questions. And then the ISO New England actually does an excellent job, and they have a lot of oversight for demand planning. So saying we're going to solve demand and we're going to lower your costs, I see those as absolute conflicting thoughts, right? You're not going to lower costs if you're picking the most expensive megawatt as what you're going to invest in. And New Hampshire rates are already too high. What people were asking for is, can you figure out a way to help bring down my bills? That is not what is happening here. They are just saying that in the executive order. They're saying, because we're focused on lowering costs. I don't know. Tell us how, because this is something that's way in the future. It's probably 5 to 10 years out, and some of these smaller reactor companies, and I'm familiar with a lot of them, they're pretty far from having anything that they can deploy. So what are we doing today? And then the last thing to remember is we don't buy Seabrook's power. And so we already paid for a nuclear power plant. And so if you're going to bring in nuclear power because you like nuclear power and you think it deserves a go and it represents innovation, and these are all the things I hear when we're hyping up the idea. But I'm a program manager, and it's like you have to be able to get from here to there. And the stuff that's in the middle is all missing. And hopefully this conference that's coming up will surface some of that, and the Department of Energy will be able to get to a point where they're not just trying to solve for the answer they already have, but they're going to take a look at it in terms of, are you actually going to be lowering costs by pursuing this? Because we will have adequate electricity if we let our regional grid continue to supply it, because their job is reliability and bringing on enough energy to supply everybody that's on the system. The last thing I will say is that we did pass a bill to have the Department of Energy look at whether we should just leave the ISO New England, which I don't understand how that would work, because they are the transmission system. And if we asked our utilities to stop participating in the ISO New England, they would be a distribution system with nothing feeding them. So I don't know where they would, when you go to flick your light on, I don't know how that would work. But so they're in the middle of doing that. And at the same time, they also passed a bill saying that we will not be participating in any offshore wind projects. So we are eliminating options in terms of the state's participation. and we are trying to row the boat towards something that has not yet been vetted or tested. So that I don't think has any, it doesn't have any chance of lowering people's bills anytime soon, if ever. So that is my presentation.
Thank you, Kat McGhee.
Sure.
Great. I mean, I think what you've sort of highlighted is that a lot of people that are currently making decisions, or at least involved in the discussion, may not actually know very much about how the system, the complex system, actually works. I mean,
Right.
that's the impression, and
I
whether
hoped I
that's
could give that context because I think a lot of people don't understand. It is complicated,
mhm,
but if it's a non sequitur, right, then adding something here, it just adds cost.
mhm.
I don't know what it's going to be connected to at that point either, depending on how things go. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and one point I was planning to make was that we originally had, we had 9 reactors, and 7 of them have been decommissioned. And some of them had been licensed to go forward into the future, like Yankee, which is close by New Hampshire here, in Vermont, and others. And so that would be the likely place if someone were looking for a location because they're already interconnected to the grid. It would be much less costly to revamp one of those sites. But but I think we need a lot more investigation. I don't think 6 months is enough time for the state to even understand which way to go. So my caution is, I actually did put in bills to try and lower people's costs, and I want to see us pursue that before we pursue something that is, that someone's interested in, that has the levers of power at this point, that's got the governor's ear and that kind of thing. I would rather see us come up with a plan, and we don't have an energy plan in the state of New Hampshire. So without that plan, I can't see how this fits into what we are doing and why.
Thank you, Representative McGee. Really great contributions. And I want to turn now to Doug Bogan. What do things look like from your perch on the seacoast? You've got Seabrook right there. You've got considerable history with that. What does all this sound like to you, Doug Bogan?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a somewhat similar approach to what Kat McGhee just described, although I hope to kind of take it a step further and look more at the alternatives to, this nuclear hegemony that we seem to be in the midst of. So let me get my slides up. I'll just share. Is this going to work?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. Yeah, so just a little bit about Seacoast Anti-Pollution League. I'm sure a lot of your audience are familiar with us, but we've actually been around for over 50 years. We actually predate the US EPA and many of the bureaucracy here in New Hampshire as well. And we actually got started when Seabrook got started. The original idea with Governor Meldrum Thompson back in the late 60s to put a nuclear plant or several somewhere on the seacoast. And of course, they settled on Seabrook. And so we took more of I guess you call a mainstream approach as opposed to, clamshell lines, of which I'm also a member, by the way. But we looked more toward the legal actions and what could be done to, stall the process. And we did have some successes. Of course, they didn't build the second reactor. There were going to be 2. They were originally going to dump all the effluent, the heated water, into the Hampton Seabrook Harbor, which you can see in the picture there. Hampton Beach being up in the top of the picture, which would have, devastated the local environment there. and instead they're putting it several miles offshore, which still has its impacts, but certainly not as great. And we generally watchdog the process along the way. We intervened to try to stop the relicensing of the plant. Somebody asked about its original license runs out in 2030 at 40 years old, but the NRC in its wisdom did decide to allow the relicensing of the plant to 2050. So that's where things stand. They were not willing to listen to our intervening arguments, which involved looking at the alternatives, oddly enough. But anyway, it's been a long road, and we're continuing to watch what goes on there. So I want to kind of present a different approach to the problem and the solution. I think, as Kat McGhee was describing, there is a solution being presented, but it's not clear what the problem was. It appears, given the makeup of the legislature and the folks in charge, that they're really trying to push the solution to address certain business interests, certain interests to gin up data centers and crypto mining, all kinds of exotic processes that take a lot of energy, and so they want to come up with energy sources that can provide that power on a 24/7 basis. That appears to be where a lot of them are coming from, although not necessarily the state as a whole. But certainly another way to approach it is that we have an unsustainable energy system. I'm sure most of the people on this call are well aware of our climate issues and the air pollution involved with fossil fuels, the limitations to fossil fuels. And I would include nuclear in a sense of fossil fuel, in that they aren't making any more of uranium or plutonium or such. We really have to think of it in terms of what is going to be sustainable for the indefinite future. And so we really need to be thinking in terms of that as the problem set. And another piece of the problem is certainly nuclear power as it exists currently is not clean. It drives me up the wall when they keep referring to clean nuclear power. It's like clean coal. It's just a complete oxymoron. Yes, it does emit over its life cycle much less carbon dioxide than other fossil fuel sources, but it is dirty and dangerous in other ways, which Ed Lyman described quite a bit. So I won't go into much more detail there, but that's certainly a problem that needs to be addressed, and we see it as a continuing problem, particularly with the existing plant, as you can see there, Seabrook. Human health impacts are certainly a big part of that. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I don't think it was mentioned that Harvard School of Public Health did several studies just very recently in the last 6-8 months that I think for the first time really ID'd cancer increases, higher levels of cancer in neighborhoods, immediately adjacent to power plants, both here in actually over the border in Massachusetts, but including Seabrook as a impact on Massachusetts residents, and also looking nationwide. Counties that have nuclear plants tend to have higher cancer rates. We found this much earlier, a decade ago, looking at data from CDC on the incidence of childhood cancer. This latest studies are all looked at elders, senior cancer rates, but it's certainly disturbing that we seem to be getting hit on both ends. And many folks may know that there was a cancer cluster identified some years ago on the Seacoast. They never did identify a source or, where the likely culprit was, but it certainly isn't ruled out that Seabrook could have been the area where the cancers occurred. Was immediately downwind of Seabrook on the prevailing wind currents. And, it's certainly worth going back and looking at that. It was very frustrating, I think, that they never really came up with an answer, even though there was a commission and so forth. And another piece of the problem, of course, is the waste. Again, won't go into a lot of detail here. This is a picture of Yucca Mountain. They spent billions of dollars, eventually determined that it really wasn't going to work, that the thing leaks, that it was not earthquake proof, and so forth. But I probably mentioned it in that the plan B, if you will, to Yucca Mountain was a repository in a granite structure. And being the granite state, New Hampshire was one of the two states, along with Maine, that was looked at for a repository. In our case, near Hillsborough, New Hampshire, it was roundly criticized by the people at the time. They were basically run out of town, but it could come back because we don't have a solution there for the waste. I just mentioned briefly about solar. I'm going to talk more about wind as far as solutions, but this analysis I thought was quite interesting, showing when solar and nuclear kind of cross paths in terms of the costs. And it turns out, X marks the spot. It was back in 2010. So it's been quite some time that solar has been more cost effective generally than nuclear. This is, I think, looking globally, but certainly in this country as well. And wind power certainly is also cheaper. So I think they have their work cut out for them to try to argue or try to present any data showing that nuclear, even new advanced nuclear, is going to be cheaper. And of course, the solution is renewables from our perspective. And I refer to the 4 S's: sustainability, safety, security, and sanity. This is the way nature works. This is the way we can have a sustainable system that will operate into the indefinite future. And we have the resources here to do that. Now, there was some work done about a decade ago looking at how each state, each country, actually around the globe, could achieve 100% renewable energy. This is from the Solutions Project based in Stanford and out in California. And they determined that, yes, New Hampshire could be fully sustainable, and it would actually save money and create jobs. Interestingly, they came up with a scenario where about 60-some% is from wind power, both onshore and offshore. Certainly less from solar, but the combination of these we're seen to be able to generate 100% of our needs. This was before even all the new batteries have been developed that, of course, would extend that whole viability. I would quibble, though, with the 40% onshore and 20% offshore. I think that should be reversed, probably even more so offshore, because we have such a great offshore resource. Also, we need to keep in mind that New Hampshire has a really pathetically poor history and current regime for promoting renewable energy. You can see the green line at the bottom. We're below really all the other New England states, but the one shown here, we're actually below the 25% that we're supposed to be at. The slogan was 25 by 25 back at the turn of the millennium. And it has turned out that the PUC has granted a waiver essentially to the utilities in the state that they don't need to get 25%. I think we peaked at about 22% or so back in 2018. And since then, they've been giving waivers because the biomass that was supposed to account for about 8% or so has not been available. It's all being sold south of us, I believe, just as the nuclear is. So that's a real problem for achieving any great improvements. And nobody even seems to talk about renewable portfolio standards anymore. It's like it's ancient history or something, but in New Hampshire, but obviously other states, they're doing much better with it. Kat went on at pretty good length about the fact that New Hampshire is not buying, New Hampshire utilities aren't buying nuclear power. But I wanted to present this chart, which is an excerpt of what's called a disclosure label that is sent out to all the ratepayers. If you have a electric account, you should be getting this in the mail. It is also available on the Department of Energy website as well for each of the utilities. This is for Eversource, the largest utility in the state. And sure enough, their percent for nuclear power, this is in 2024, the latest data we have, was 0.17%. So, less than 0.2%. That's only half of what we're getting from the landfill gas. It's really amazing how little nuclear power is being purchased here in New Hampshire, and that's pretty similar with the other utilities as well, whether it's Unitil or the Community Power Coalition. It's less than 1% or very small. In fact, in 2023, the previous year, it was 0.0% for Eversource. Perhaps folks here are aware of this, but I find very few people ever look at these disclosure reports, even though I find them quite fascinating. And it also, of course, details where we get the renewables from as well. And of course, the renewable level, as I said, last 2024 was like 13.5% for Eversource. So a pretty sad record there. And yes, it may be because they're doing long-term contracts to head south of here. But again, we end up with the waste. We paid the cost to build the thing. So it certainly doesn't seem fair at the very least. Just to then go back to the renewable energy sources that we could be doing. I don't know if folks have seen this map before, but this is from the U.S. Department of Energy. The brighter colors, of course, are the offshore wind potential. And you can see some of the best potential is right off of New England in the Northeast, this bright red and even blue. So we really have an opportunity to tap into this. This is our major indigenous energy source, in addition to solar, of course. We don't have any fossil fuels. We don't have any uranium available in great quantities in New Hampshire, but we do have a lot of offshore wind. Maine, and I kind of present this as an alternative approach, what New Hampshire should have been doing and could be doing, but of course has decided not to at this point. They started, over 15 years ago to look at the potential for offshore wind, came up with a study and determined that they could get thousands of megawatts from the Gulf of Maine. They even passed a law setting a goal of 3,000 megawatts by 2040, just in Maine, which would be about enough to run the whole state, really. And they detailed how they could get energy from both onshore wind, offshore wind, to not only, cover the current needs, but to allow for electric transportation, conversion of all, heating to heat pumps, all electric, and still have energy left over to export and make some money selling it to dumb states like New Hampshire. Kat also mentioned the queue that the ISO New England came up with, and this is a few years old now, but you can see that the vast majority of it is wind power, much of that offshore wind. A lot of those haven't come to pass because of the federal intervention, but again, there's no nuclear up there. There's very little fossil fuel. It's mostly renewables, and that I think is and should continue. Again, offshore wind is big. It's getting bigger and bigger. Individual turbines now are 10 to 15 megawatts. These are 3 times the size of the ones that actually Kat and I both and others visited down at Block Island. And they're getting taller and taller. The legislation that was passed this year talks about nuclear plants at 5 megawatts, which they seem to have borrowed from solar, which makes no sense. But anyway, these turbines are 3 times that size. It would be a very small wind farm to meet the 200 or so megawatts that they seem to be proposing. New Hampshire ought to pursue for nuclear power. And, it's being developed off our shores as we speak. I won't go into the detail. Sure heard about Vineyard Wind and other ones, but in the Gulf of Maine, the Department of Interior, before they got totally derailed, did designate a number of lease areas for offshore wind, a wind energy area that constitutes 1 million acres of real estate out in the ocean. And they did hold an auction, and 4 of those sites shown in this map the leases were sold. As you may have heard, one of the companies, Inver Energy, I think it's called, did get a buyout deal with the Trump administration. So the areas in green are no longer held by Inver Energy. I don't know if they go away or they can be bought by somebody else, but we hope that will be restarted. Hopefully, I know there was a court case that did say Trump was, out of line getting rid of this process, but it's not clear where that'll go forward. But the point is, there's a huge amount of energy out there. We could be tapping into that. The state could be playing a role, as Maine and Massachusetts and other states are doing as we speak, except that we seem to be stuck on this fascination with nuclear. So we really have to ask whether, we're going to have some kind of renaissance of nuclear or a sunset, because it seems to be going down, not up. And certainly renewables, from our perspective, are really the future. So we have to ask if we're at the dawn of a new age or a decline of our whole grid as it's going. So that's what I had to say. We do have a New England coalition of offshore wind. The New Hampshire Network is a part of that, along with many other groups, and we hope to continue this if we can get over the current malaise in Washington and in Concord. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug Boden. Very nice contribution, perspective from New Hampshire directly. I want to jump straight into some of the questions. We don't have too much time left, but we have with us Representative Jordan Ullery from the House, New Hampshire House, and he has a few questions and observations. And one of them, since you've been talking about wind power, he asks, let's see, where is that? I'm looking for that question. I know what I wanted to highlight there. Okay, so Representative Ullery asks, in Europe, there's been massive testing, overregulation, and success of mini nuclear power plants, and he cites links a publication, and wonders why we're calling it a new power system if there has been testing and success in other countries. And that kind of brings me to a question that I had as well, which is that some countries like Japan and South Korea have not had huge increases in costs or delays. Why is that? And could we conceivably reproduce that in our country? And I guess, Dr. Lyman, I guess Ed Lyman, I guess you could probably address those questions.
Okay, yes, thank you. And to the first one, I didn't open the link, but I'm not aware of any small modular reactor development or deployment outside of China or Russia at this point. So I think what the representative was referring to was a political statement that was signed by some members of the EU in support of such development, but there are no projects I'm aware of. In fact, the only new nuclear reactor construction that's taken place in Western Europe in decades has been large light water reactors, and every single one of them is consistent with the U.S. experience in that they experience massive cost overruns and delays. The most recent being the Hinkley seed plant in the United Kingdom, which some people have said it may be the most expensive building in history when it's completed. So, yeah, so that experience isn't there. In terms of cost, I haven't heard, well, Japan, of course, hasn't built any nuclear reactors in a couple of decades now. Fukushima shut down their industry for a long time. We'll have to see what happens moving forward. South Korea and China are often pointed to as countries where they don't seem to experience the same capital cost or extreme capital cost for new reactor projects. But to take China, for example, their economy is, of course, completely different than ours. Their nuclear power sector is largely government subsidized in a number of different ways, including financing terms, which, of course, the cost of capital is a big part of the ultimate project cost for a new, large infrastructure project like a nuclear plant. We don't really know where those costs are being buried in the Chinese economy. And also in terms of worker compensation, worker safety, materials, quality, and supply, all those things are different. So it's a little hard to compare China directly. In terms of South Korea, it's not a command economy like that, but they have some similar trends. And in fact, there was a scandal in South Korea about falsifying the quality assurance records for materials for nuclear construction. And quality assurance is a big cost driver in for new nuclear power plants. In fact, one of the elements that's under attack now is the or requirements for high quality materials in nuclear construction, claiming that SMRs are so safe you can use off the shelf components like that you buy at Home Depot
Yeah.
instead of nuclear grade construction, and that isn't doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That's not where I would look to cut.
Ron,
Wait, you're muted, Ed. Kat, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that in Japan, I think they had, after Fukushima, they had opted to shut down other nuclear facilities, even though that was really started by a tsunami, right? That was a natural disaster that caused it to have its steam explosion. But my understanding is perhaps the reason they're not experiencing as high a cost as everyone else is they turned those already sunk costs, they turn those plants back on. And that is one thing that nuclear has as an advantage is that once you've paid for it, it's a very low cost to run, right? It's 24/7,
Hmm.
so it's high capacity and steady state. So I think they're reinitiating the power plants and people wanted them closed, just like in Germany they did the same thing, right? They said, oh, we're going to close them all, and then they ended up buying power from France because they had extra to spare because of their nuclear programs. But it is really about what problem you're solving, right? New Hampshire has very few people. We are a donor state. I didn't even make that. We generate more than we use. So I don't know. I think it's a very big nut to swallow for a small population state, not just even looking at environmental or other concerns around the technology itself, which can be solved. I think that, that we have had nuclear power plants running safely for a long time. So those things can be addressed, but the idea of whether this is New Hampshire's solution to high costs, again, I know I've said that before, but I'll be like that to me, that's the main thing is I don't understand. It's a non sequitur for me. They don't match.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Doug and Kat, maybe you'll be able to answer a question from Marie Morgan also, which is isn't Seabrook waste stored at Seabrook, and is there a limit or a time frame when it can't store anymore? I mean, presumably which I don't know either. Is that in fact
Yeah,
where it's being
they're
stored? What are they
stored
doing
in
with it?
cement casks that are made for that very purpose, and they put them out on this giant flat of it's like a football field, and I think it's about a third of the way full. It takes a long time for them to fill it up.
Hmm.
So that's from all the years that it's been in operation. I've been over there, so
Hmm.
um, uh, yeah, that's it. I mean, they have casks, they call them, that are cement, so it's sealed in cement, and nothing emits from that radiation wise. I mean, they have NRC protocols that they have to follow in order to have the stuff stored there. So
Yeah, sure.
that's what it is, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
But
regrettably, I think we've come pretty much to the end of our time, and I want to give a few minutes to my colleague Susan Richmond, who's going to talk about what's upcoming for us. So, do you want to share the screen, Susan?
Sure. Here we go. So, this is where we are today, but up. Now I'm having trouble getting it to move. There we go. Starting tomorrow is this is I recommend you get your phone out, and that's probably the easiest thing is just take a picture of this. This stakeholder sessions, you can go in person to Portsmouth, or these are the links that you can join them on Teams. And in addition, you can send your comments right here. So I'll give everyone a couple seconds if they want to take a picture of the slide. But you can also get this information if you go to the Department of Energy. So it's not secret. Okay,
And it'll be on our website as well,
right. Okay, next
if it's
slide.
not already.
Come back next Monday. We're going to be talking about the U.S. Forest Service reorganization. What does that mean for New England? And the convenient, easy registration, remember, is bit.ly/forestsnh. And we've got 3 experts talking about forests. And so that's the information part that we'll be giving out. But it turns out that a number of New Hampshire organizations are having their own little hearing since New Hampshire has not organized a formal one. And that's the information right here. U.S. Forest Service is not hosting a hearing, so we are 350 New Hampshire, Sierra Club, Standing Trees, National Parks. And this is about the roadless rule, which currently is protecting a lot of our White Mountain National Forest from construction and logging. So in person at the Universalist Church. So I do not think there's a Zoom option for that. Reimar, do you know? I think that's just
I
in
think
person.
that's only in person,
Okay.
but I'm not positive about that, but I believe that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. And then
Go to 315 NH or to Sierra Club, and you'll be able to get all the information.
sounds good. Okay, and then a little bit about us. If you are on our mailing list, you'll get weekly updates, although we're pretty quiet in the summer. But we'll let you know about meetings, events. We have working groups. Climate is the one that is meeting in the summer, July 1st and August 5th, the first Wednesday of each month at 7. Plastics and Energy will resume in September, and we really try and take on projects that get more information out there and help to make New Hampshire more sustainable. This is what our spreadsheet looks like when the legislative season is underway, and we definitely rely on Representative McGhee and other legislators on this call for the information that we use to come up with our recommendations. And we will again have an in-person summit. In this case, we're going to try it in September 19th, but again, in person at Star King in Plymouth, which, as you can see, is a really beautiful sanctuary. And I had to sneak this in. We're trying really hard to get the legislature to consider banning plastic bags at grocery stores. All other New England states and other mid-Atlantic states do not have grocery bags. There really is a very concerning plastic and microplastic problem, and this seems like the easiest plastic to address. So again, if you've got your phone out, here's how you can sign the petition or go to bit.ly no plastic bags, or you can get a presentation in your very community. I'm getting to know New Hampshire really well visiting. So that's my personal plug. And then finally, this is where we are, newhampshirenetwork.org. And we love having two-way conversations. So we say things, but you can post to our network too. And that's it. Thanks, Reinmar.
And to all of our three speakers, thank you so much. Don't know if Ed Lyman is still here, but in any case, all of you, wonderful, very useful and enlightening presentations. And we thank you so much for doing this. And thank you to the audience as well. Thanks everyone for their questions. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to more, but that seems to be our track record, unfortunately. I don't know what to do about it unless we go to 2 hours, and I don't want to do that. So,
Hang the gavel.
Thanks,
thank
sir.
you very much, Ed. Thanks, Kat and Doug, and we'll see you all tomorrow, next week, hopefully, or as many of you as possible.
Thank
Thank
you.
Take care.
Good luck, folks.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye-bye.